Right. The reason is to just get it to smaller files to post on the web. But you know what? I feel really honored and privileged here because that was a really fantastic presentation. I didn't have to spend any money on airfare. It's free. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Oh, my pleasure. Sorry, I didn't quite stick to the time limit, but
well, that was time dilation. That was a 20-minute talk.
Right. That was
but if you want to ask questions, make sure you unmute. So everybody can unmute now if you want, as long as there's no background noise.
Excellent, Ryan. That was really great. I got a lot out of that. Thank you.
Yeah, some of that was similar to your AAS presentation.
Yeah, actually, there is a little bit of overlap with what I did at AAS. So we had a session on visualization this past January. And yeah, that was another one I probably tried to cram too much into. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different directions you can take with this, but I do think that the kind of core message of stepping back and trying to put ourselves in our audience's shoes and understand what people are seeing when we put stuff on the dome and try to remove whatever barriers we can is kind of the critical thing.
So, Ryan, you've given this to general audiences?
This particular talk, I have...
or something similar to it?
Not so much general audiences. I've given this, the first time I gave this was to a NASA visualization kind of cohort who was looking at visuals in different NASA programs, visual representations. And then I've tweaked it to give it to mostly like college students and other like professional organization kind of places.
I was just curious if your general audiences, general public, respond well to something like this. And I mean, do they walk away with a spring in their step and understand a little bit more of, you know, what they see on the dome or in the theater?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I haven't really given it to, I've mostly been focused on presenting to like practitioners, people who are making visuals and trying to get people to think about the choices they make when they create visuals. Interestingly, though, I mentioned in my sort of self-introduction the Gordon Research Conference on Visualization in Science and Education, and we are organizing a conference for 2019 where we're actually looking at kind of both sides. We're thinking of this as a bridge, basically, where you have one part of the bridge are the content creators and the people who are creating the visualizations, trying to make visualizations that are understandable. And then the other side is really building up the capacity in particularly our, our education system to help people understand how to interpret visuals and how to look critically at visual representations, and eventually kind of ultimately our hope is that in a college class or some context like that, that people will then move on to make their own visual representations.
Hey, Ryan, we have a question in the chat. Andy is unable to speak, so he has a specific question about the migratory bird visualization. He says, what did the single yellow dots represent?
Yeah, so basically that represents birds that weren't moving much. So basically this particular data set shows individual birds that are tracked. And so there are different data. For example, eBird is a Cornell-based migration data set, and they look at the aggregate observations, and it's really only good in the US. At the aggregate observations, you can kind of see this wash of birds migrating from north to south during the course of a year. But this is tracking individual birds. So if a bird kind of flew down to the Amazon and lingered here for a bit and just, enjoyed the buffet for a while, it would just show up as this. And in the film, actually, you can see these wiggle around a little bit. They're just not moving much. So
I jotted down some notes with a couple questions. One thing I noticed that one of the first graphics that you showed was Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, and the first thing came to my mind was, well, this doesn't have a title, and your explanation actually had a critical piece of information about what it was all about. And there would be an even more important critical thing about what the meaning of it is, you know, in terms of ages of stars.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you have any opinions or, you know, wisdom about putting words or titles or labels or something on visualizations.
I think, so it totally depends on the context from my perspective. So in our planetarium shows, we use words very sparingly. And that's because the words increase cognitive load for people observing the show. So if you're in the planetarium and your visual view is filled up with this giant, this vast amount of visual information, and then you're listening to some person, you know, yammering at you, and you've got a music soundtrack, and you're emotionally engaged. It's a lot to take in, and we actually did test this with a few select visuals. Labeling actually ends up just interfering. So in that context, we try to design this so that people can listen to the narration and follow along is the hope. And actually we do evaluate that to test how well people are following along with the content. But we avoid using labels and words. However, in a presentation where it's more of a didactic, more of a, particularly a live presentation where you can explain and kind of you know, you're giving the audience more time to digest. We'll use words of that for those kind of visuals.
Yeah, that makes sense because I mean, in the education world, there's a lot of you know, visual learners and audio learners, and it's good to put up words along, especially for language, you know, second language.
And when we create visuals for online, so actually that same data viz that I showed you of the bird migration, we have an HD version of that we have in our Habitat in the Classroom, Habitat Earth in the Classroom set of resources. And those have words, and our intention is students are going to go to the YouTube video and they're going to scrub back and forth, and they can interact with it, they can extract the information they need, and so the words are helpful there. And in exhibits, we do something kind of similar, but it's when you're kind of locked in the seat in the planetarium, you have to follow along. And we even tested this with some visuals, as I said, the words just sort of get in the way.
So another question I had was with the Pillars of Creation one, where you said that longer wavelengths were towards red and shorter wavelengths towards blue. I mean, beyond those parts of the spectrum. It's that what came to my mind there was that your explanation of what was going on there was very good, and we get these things from a scientist's explanation of an image. Okay, usually there's, you know, if it's a public release, a PR image, there'll be a little science explanation that goes along with it. They try to make public ready, but they sometimes fail. So I guess what comes to mind is how do we get the scientist's explanation if it's not there? And then the other one is, even if we do get it, how do we make that public ready and get language that people can really understand?
Well, yeah, that's a really huge question. I mean, I think that one part of the answer is something that I've been working on for a while with folks from Space Telescope and mostly Space Telescope Europe and Spitzer, to create metadata that goes along with the images. So if nothing else, you as an educator have all of the information about, you know, what I didn't have in my PowerPoint, which is what does blue represent, what does yellow represent, what does green represent, or red represent, and be able to at least have that information so that you can help interpret it. Oh, am I looking at infrared, or am I looking at narrowband? Am I looking at what are we actually showing people here? Because often that information gets divorced from the image. So that's the first step. But yeah, the astronomer interpretation is challenging. I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, Jeff happens to be very good at explaining this, and so I was kind of conveying what he had talked to me about. But yeah, so many times you're sort of stuck with whatever the PR office can give in that.
Yeah, I agree. That's a pretty big challenge. Yeah, that's a hard question. I'll give you one other bad question.
Okay.
What about colorblind people?
Oh yeah. So I'm actually colorblind, and that's this example of the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram taking away the color is just a quick and dirty way of telling what's going to be colorblind friendly or not. This is a clear indication that this image is not colorblind friendly because the luminance information does not match the color information. Funny story. So the entire exhibits team here knows that I'm colorblind, and so I'm kind of thought of as a guinea pig for these things. And I told them about this. Oh, well, you know, if you've got a visual and just, you know, create a desaturated, like a black and white version of it, and that'll be a way of just testing whether or not, you know, it's going to be readable by a colorblind audience. And they're, oh yeah, that's great, thank you so much. And the next meeting I went to with exhibits, they handed out printouts. Everyone else had a color printout, and they gave me a black and white. I'm like, yeah, you totally missed the point on that. That's for you. But actually, what's great is, and unfortunately, I need to put more of these resources on my resources page. There are great resources now for helping to create colorblind friendly graphics. First of all, even like Photoshop has a colorblind filters, so you can simulate different types of colorblindness in an image and just tell how readable it's going to be. There are also resources that give colorblind safe palettes. So if you want to, you know, if you've got 5 different things that you're showing in a graph, what are 5 colors that are going to be clearly distinguishable by someone who's colorblind? So there are a lot of resources out there. So that's the good news, is that it's becoming easier and easier to access the tools that allow you to do this.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna sort of call an official end to it, and we can stay on for a little while more, but I'm going to shut off the recording so that the conversation now is going to be off the record, so to speak. And again, I want to thank Ryan for this amazing presentation. Everybody take off your mute and let's have a round of applause for Ryan.
Yeah, your last question wasn't so bad, actually. After all, Alan.